Welcome to our Hatchery Live. I'm Jose Leal with my co-host Matt Perez. And today, for the second time, we've got Cliff Berg coming back to us. So it's Agile 2 and interview number 2. So you're into twos today. How you doing, Cliff?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Nice to have you back. So
Pleasure. Thank you.
we really enjoyed our conversation with you last time, and digging into, both of us had some experience with Agile, and distinguishing Agile from Radical, trying to understand what those two things are, and learning what you're doing with Agile too. So a great opportunity to look a little deeper and learn a little bit more from what you guys are doing, and also from your experience in the field.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Jose.
Do you want to, just for folks who didn't see the first episode, just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, first I'll mention what Agile 2 is. You may know, you may not know. If you're watching this, you probably know what Agile is. In case you don't, Agile is, I would say, it's a movement that started about 20 years ago in the IT community, and it kind of grew out of that, and it's permeated a lot of different areas, mainly product development companies, and although it's been used in lots of domains. But the Agile community evolved a set of ideas that some of the ideas were a little bit problematic. And there's also a lot of splintering that occurred within the Agile community, but the core ideas were sound. And so a few years ago, some colleagues and I put together a team of 15 people to kind of revisit it and take a more science-based approach. What do we know about behavioral psychology and cognitive science, about how people think and how they communicate, and leadership theory? There's a lot of research in leadership. And operations research. We talk about lean, but how do things really work? And so we came up with what we ended up calling Agile 2 and wrote a book about it. And then I formed a company with some people, some of those, a subset, not in order to create some kind of certification scheme or something, but to help organizations to actually achieve real agility. So we use these ideas. We also use a lot of other ideas. We're partnered with a company called Human Synergistics that has a very effective, very robust organizational culture model. We use a lot from leadership. One of us is an organizational psychologist. So, we take an approach an inquisitive approach, where we try to understand people's situation and help them to achieve true agility, often having nothing to do with so-called agile methods. It depends on their situation. I myself have a long career in different aspects of engineering. I was an electrical engineer. I was a nuclear engineer. I have a degree in operations research and industrial engineering, as well as some other things. And I also had a very successful startup in the late 90s that grew to about 200 people. And we built things that worked at scale, mission critical things. And I ended up writing a book called High Assurance Design, which described a very agile approach to conceptualizing and building systems, but in a flexible and learning-based way, systems that have to work. And I've been involved with the Agile community since the movement started. My company at that time adopted extreme programming, which I personally don't really relate to, but people at my company wanted it, and I trusted them, and it worked well for them. So that's about empowering people to do what works for them. And I've been writing and involved in the Agile community ever since. How's that?
That was great. That was great. I think you did an even better job this time. So you've gotten good at this.
I'll take your word for it, because I don't remember what I said last time.
it just seemed like you really wrapped that up, both with your personal experience and the radical piece, or pardon me, the agile piece. So one of the things that Matt and I have been trying to do with this podcast is to learn about what's happening out in the real world, and how it matches with the ideas that we've been curating and testing and building through Radical. And so one of the conversations we had last time that piqued my interest in having another conversation with you was your view of organizational hierarchy, and the need for that. I wonder if we could start there. What are your thoughts on the chance that organizational hierarchy is going to morph into something different or disappear altogether as it is today?
Well, I don't think it can disappear. I mean, would you really want to be in an organization where, it was a free for all? Because what happens then is hidden power networks emerge, and some people are in and other people are out. Do you want to be out? And to be in, you have to, this is how organized crime works, frankly. It's very evolutionary, very organic, and the people who behave in powerful, aggressive ways win and rise up in the implicit hierarchy, even if it's not explicit.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think anyone really wants to work in an organization that doesn't have structure, because structure is there not just to help organize, it's also there to protect people. We have rules, like, the so-called hallway conversation can be good if it's like in the moment and people are generative, but it can also be very bad if it excludes people. The so-called decision made on the golf course or decision made in the men's room that excludes people because it goes outside of, a lot of these rules are here to protect people as well. There is always structure. There is always structure, whether it's explicit or implicit. If you start with no structure, structure will evolve over time, and you will end up with structure, whether it's explicit or not. There will be structure. There will be a power hierarchy within the organization. There will be.
Absolutely. We agree with that. I think the question is, should that hierarchy be an imposed one, what we call a fiat hierarchy, where the individual at the top has the privilege and the right, and in some cases, the mandate to impose their will throughout the organization?
Well, before I answer that, because it kind of sounds like a loaded question, like, do you favor autocratic or not? It's not like that. It's all about behavior. Organizations, almost every organization has a CEO. And that's for a reason, because it provides accountability. It provides also a touch point. It provides, the face of the organization. That person often is a strong advocate for the organization, which is very important. But, organizations have other leaders too. Intel is a famous case where there were 3 people who led that company. And at various times, each of them was CEO for some period of time. But it really was those 3 people, and they were very different types of leaders. Together, they combined the leadership traits that were needed to run the organization. How people behave when they have authority is the issue. People who are at the top, in a relative sense, at the top of some group, can be very, very toxic. Authority is dangerous. It's, you give someone a specific role and authority over something, they can very easily misuse that and make things miserable. But authority also can be very, very useful and very powerful if the behavior is good. And so if you have, it's like the case of the benevolent king. There's nothing
Right.
more effective than a benevolent king. The dilemma is, how do you know you're going to get a benevolent one? And That's the challenge. In an organization, what makes an organization effective has very little to do with the structure. It has almost 98% has to do with the behavior of the people who have influence in that organization, whether it's through influence through authority or just influence because they're persuasive. The influence, the way that people behave is very much determined by who gets given authority and by what incentives are created, and that's very much generated by the behavior and attitudes of the people at the top. If the people at the top promote people who have positive leadership traits, that tends to permeate everything. And the organization then behaves in a very healthy way. And, positive leadership traits include empowering others. So an organization that has hierarchy does not equate to an organization that's autocratic. Not at all. Hierarchy is there.
So you think autocratic is not desirable? Is that what you're saying? Or
I'm sorry, what's that?
Are you saying that autocratic is not desirable? I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
No, it won't have to work for someone who's autocratic. Autocratic is, someone who just gives orders out and doesn't listen. Someone who never asks for your opinion. Someone who thinks they know it all. That's toxic behavior. An organization that is run by autocrats generally will not survive long today, because today you need the brains of all the people, and you want people to feel empowered to share their ideas, and you want discussions to be high quality. You want the best idea to win, not the favorite idea of the leader. So you want the behaviors to be such that if there is a team lead, say, let's take a simple case, where you have a group of people and there's a team lead, whatever that means. It might just mean that person is gets people organized or something, but whatever it means, issues come up and people identify those issues right away. By the way, this is happening. What should we do? And there's a discussion, and the best idea wins. It's someone could be the team lead says, well, what if we do this? Well, what do you think? And other people say, no, that won't work because of this. Oh, you're right. And then someone says, what if we do this? Yeah, well, that will lead to that, and that might work. But then what if the discussion goes on and now it's been an hour and there's no consensus? Because some people say, we should do this. Well, that might work, but I think it'd be better if we do this. And some people want that. And they kind of can't agree. They think we could do this or do that. Those are the two choices that might work. And then should you vote? I don't know if voting is a good approach. Maybe. But at some point, you've invested enough time discussing it, and you need a decision on what to try. And if the groups of people are not good at quickly making a decision. And so very often it's very helpful to have someone who is the designated leader who says, okay, we've talked it through. Here's what we're going to do. Let's try it and see what happens. And then once we try it, we can revisit it. It's not a closed issue. That's not autocratic. That's decisiveness. And decisiveness and empowering people go hand in hand. They're not opposites. They go hand in hand, because empowering people is getting them to think of ideas, letting them try it in their way. But still, there need to be decisions in a timely way. And you need, a good leader knows when to decide and when to back off and say, do what you think. They need to know when to do each of those.
Okay. Here's the thing that I'm struggling with. I founded a company in 2007, was completely self-managed. There were no titles. There was no leaders. There was no anything else. And by what you're saying, that it shouldn't have existed. It should have been. It should have gone to the worst case, which is what you assumed. You assumed that, oh, there's a free for all. There's no decisions and stuff like that. And you're not alone. Okay, you're not the only one that makes that jump. Um, that people make that assumption that if there's no strong leader, that there's going to be a free for all, nothing in between, this or that. And at least my experience is that no, it's there's a lot of shades in between. There's a lot of stuff that people have to learn, no question about it. And but it doesn't result in chaos. It doesn't result in non-decision making and stuff like that. Not having an imposed structure. That's to me, that's a fact. I lived with it for 15 years. I'm still living with it, and the company is now up to, I think, 900 people or something like that. It's a lot of people. And
Do they still have no structure?
Yeah, there's what you call structure, meaning a boss and a vice boss and a vice boss and a vice. They're all bosses because it's all imposed. But it's still self-managed, yeah. And so how do you put this together? And my answer is by accepting shades of it, not chaos and complete happiness or something. Is what you call structure and what you call decisiveness. You need those too, no question about that. But you don't need it to be imposed.
Well, I don't know the specific situation, but in my experience, in a group of people, there are a few who emerge as the leaders, and usually there's one with a little group around them. And when you have a large organization that divides up into many groups, they emerge, and you end up with lots of groups. And there's some people who have influence across groups. They develop. I would wage $1,000 that there are people in your company that have substantially more influence than the average person in the company. I would wager $1,000 that there are people who are de facto leaders to a very substantial degree.
And you're right. And you'll be right. There's not an infinite amount of people that take on that role, but it's not imposed and it's dynamic. So for some things, this person has more influence. For some other things, this person has more influence and stuff like that. And so it doesn't come out of the me telling, oh, you're the leader, but rather than saying, rather than this person speaking up a certain way and having more influence and stuff like that. And oftentimes that influence comes from places where you least expect it. Sometimes the most junior person is the one that is the most influential about it, which you wouldn't discover the other way. So anyways, how's your company organized now? I mean, do you have an imposed structure, or do you have?
We don't. But I founded the company, so I tend to, have final say when I want to. But I never tell other people how to do what they're doing. We have a lot of discussions about things. When clients sometimes will email me and say, "Can we talk?" and I talk to them one-on-one so they can be transparent about everything.
Right.
What if they have a complaint about someone? which hasn't happened yet, but it could happen.
Yeah.
Going back to your company, that kind of situation can be effective. But I would point out that it in my experience, it tends to filter. You tend to end up with the people who develop influence tend to be the ones who are more expressive and more influential in their behavior. They tend to be the ones who network, the ones who make their case, the ones who are conversational, the
Well,
more outgoing ones, and that tends to filter and silence a portion of people who just are not inclined to make their case in a forceful way.
so again, in my experience, and from Burzog, it's a Dutch company that does healthcare and stuff like that. What happens is that other people learn. They see what's going on. They get more relaxed about the whole thing, and they learn how to communicate. So it's not so much that they get stifled, but that they get to learn from other folks as well. And the Dutch company, what they do is they have, I think, thousands of people now in the Netherlands.
10,000.
10,000, and they don't have a particular boss. There's small groups of nurses in neighborhoods, and what happens is the other people learn to express themselves and be more assertive and stuff like that, which is usually something that we learn not to do in the system that we live in.
I want to get to the topic of the day, because we've sort of sideswiped Cliff here a little bit with me introducing that other topic. But Cliff, we've been talking about roles. In essence, we're talking about the same thing. Roles within teams, roles within Agile, roles within organizations. So do we need special Agile roles?
Well, now I would say, given, if we don't need managers, then why do we need any roles? Why do we need Agile coaches? Why do we need, everyone's the same, right? Anyone can have a good idea about anything. So why do we need any roles?
But again, Cliff, you're making a jump. You're going from, some people had assigned certain roles, and everybody's the same. It's not like that. It's not that quick of a jump. There's a lot of shades in between. There's expertise. If I know more about, I don't know, how to do X, and you know more about Agile and the methodology and all that stuff, then I'm going to take directions from you. I'm not going to be stupid and go, well, because I have my role. No, it's not like that. So you have your role. I have my roles. So I'll let Jose continue.
Yeah, I think the issue of structure that is imposed and the ability for people to take on roles are two different questions.
It's not entirely, because, an important role is final decision maker. Imagine you have a fire department and there's a fire. The fire chief plays a very important role, because it's an emergency situation, lives are at stake,
Mm-hmm.
and someone needs to be paying attention to where everybody is and what's happening. And so the fire chief might go on the radio and say, Joe, go to the second floor because there's someone there, I just found out. And there needs to be, okay, I'll do that. Okay. And that person is doing that with authority. But, someone who has authority should also be a listener, because you don't want toxic authority. Authority is a role. And what you want that fire chief to be listening, because someone might come on the radio and say, no, don't do that, because I'm on the second floor. I just got there and I'm closer. And so instead of being a bully and saying, do what I say, go, someone who gives an order because there's a sense of urgency, because time matters, should also be a listener. And shouldn't micromanage. They should, tell people this is what we need to do, and they should listen because people have usually better ideas. I think we should be doing this instead. Oh, why do you think that? Let's discuss that. Authority, to Matt's point, it's not an absolute either. Within an organization, people will develop influence. And what you don't want is a situation where you have favoring certain personality types. You want to get the best of everybody. And, so there is a balance. You do want people to be able to develop organic influence. You do. But it's dangerous because that becomes politics. And politics can be toxic or beneficial. It's toxic if it's self-serving. It's beneficial if it's making trade-offs that find a compromise that benefits everybody collectively.
But
So
in a traditional management structure, you have the same issue. Typically, not everybody applies to be the boss, because the boss requires a certain type of personality or skill set, and the organization may have a certain definition of who the boss can and should be. In many cases, gender, race, and other issues that are, part of the organizational ethos, and we see that every day in many different organizations, right? So it's not the structure that makes it or breaks it. I think.
Well, I would
is
point
that fair
out,
to say?
that's absolutely true. It's the behavior. And I would point out that, it's, diversity, equity, inclusion requires structure, because people will naturally make decisions that reflect their personal bias, knowingly or not. And, so we have rules and policies and decision-making processes, in order to make sure that that we are being fair to people.
Is it possible, though, Cliff, that we could help people actually do that from the people rather than from the imposition? That we have to overcome that no matter what. Do we have to overcome that by imposing on people, or can we actually overcome that by helping individuals to see that in themselves, to see those, whatever you may want to call them, that they happen to, act in a certain way, behave in a certain way that isn't, good for them, good for the rest of the community that they're operating in.
Well, there are two dilemmas, because you should, basically you're saying improve the EQ of everybody, which you should definitely do. But that only goes so far. A lot of people are pretty toxic. That's just the spectrum of humanity. And a lot of them work for our companies. I don't mean your company or my company, but if you look at the average organization, not everybody has a high EQ. Far from it. And another dilemma is that there very often are zero-sum situations in an organization. There just are. There might be two different products that share something, and one needs, so you might have to make the choice: you get it, or you get it, or how much. And do you really expect that those product managers are going to want what's best for the organization versus their product? They might to some degree, but it depends. There's, how much, and, so, if you have a completely self-organizing situation, not everybody makes decisions for the benefit of the organization, and expecting that they all will is expecting a lot.
Well, but we've been doing the traditional way of managing, and I mean, recently we've seen evidence of what happens at major corporations. We laid off thousands of people here in the Valley, where a handful of people made a decision to lay off tens of thousands of people. Not their own managers weren't aware of the fact that they were being laid off, that the team members were being laid off. They were laid off via email overnight. Those are examples of the types of organization that we have, and these are, in some cases, they are the pinnacle of what we consider a good corporation, a Google or a Facebook or someone like that.
Yeah, but these are apples and oranges, because why does hierarchy have anything to do with that? Those companies have a crisis financially, and they had to do something about it. And so, if there were no hierarchy, then what would happen? So a company that has no hierarchy will never have layoffs. I don't know.
I wasn't referring to whether they should or shouldn't. That's a different equation, because they're not, they made $33 billion last year. So I don't think that's much of a crisis. But is it fair to say that we have had a system for many, many, many years, and that system also has not necessarily perfected itself? And there isn't, you would think that by now we kind of figured out how to use that kind of top-down organization to overcome a lot of these issues.
It's not a system, it's not about the system, it's about the culture. If you look at the US politics and government, it's the same system as it was 50 years ago, but it's a lot more messed up today because the culture has changed. It's the same in organizations. It's you can take a hierarchy or no hierarchy, and the culture of the people, the culture of that organization is very much predictive of how it will behave. Organizations that have hierarchy can be like apples and oranges. You can have two organizations, they both have the same hierarchy, and they behave completely differently. Hierarchy is not the issue. Right. It's not the issue. The issue is the cultural norms. It's the behavior and attitudes of the people who have influence, whether it's influence through positional authority or influence because they're persuasive. It's the culture of those people that determines the behavior of the organization. It's a behavioral issue. It's not, the hierarchy is not the problem.
Okay. No, I'm hearing you loud and clear. I appreciate that. Matt, I was just gonna, if I may, I was just gonna ask one thing, because the culture is then at the personal level, right? We don't impose culture. Some organizations have tried that; it hasn't worked very well. But
it's not a matter of impose. It's you can't impose culture, but you can create culture. The people who Satya Nadella is famous for shifting the culture of Microsoft. It took 10 years because it's a big company, but you absolutely can shift culture intentionally. It's not just like a complex adaptive system that evolves on its own. People forget that evolving systems evolve because the ones that evolve poorly die. You don't want your company to die. You want it to evolve well, and that requires intention. Someone's got to be driving. when David Marquette wrote his book, Turn the Ship Around, what he describes is not like just a no hierarchy place. What he describes is he empowered people, he taught them, he coached them, he taught them how to think out loud, he changed the culture, he set expectations, he let people figure out how to get stuff done. But he stayed the captain. He still made decisions about things.
He had to say the captain. It was the military. And so with that, I'll leave the last word to you, Cliff, because I have to announce the next guest, which is Phil Johnson. Speaking of emotional intelligence, he's the CEO of Master of Business Leadership. It's an emotional intelligence company, and we'll find out more about it next week when we talk to him. And by the way, this company is in Canada. I don't know what that means, but it says that here. So with that, I thank you very much for rolling with all the punches so far so well, and thank you for sticking with us for a second time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff.
Bye.
Bye.